There comes a point, often after 50, when life stops feeling like something you're building and starts feeling like something you're reviewing. You look back more often. You measure time differently, and quietly, a question begins to surface times. Is this all there is? You've lived enough to understand how things really work? You've seen effort go unrewarded, plans fall apart, and opportunities pass by when you least expected it. And over time, that experience can turn into something subtle, a quiet lowering of expectations. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like being realistic. You tell yourself you're just adjusting to where you are. But deep down, there's a part of you that knows something else is happening. Something that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with belief. Because the moment you start thinking your best years are behind you, your actions begin to follow that thought. You stop reaching as far. You stop expecting as much. You begin to settle not because you have to, but because it feels safer. And that's how people slowly drift into a life that feels smaller than it should. Not through one decision, but through a series of quiet adjustments, each one reasonable, each one justified, until one day you realize you're no longer building, you're maintaining. But what if that's not the truth? What if this stage of your life is not the closing chapter, but the point where everything finally becomes usable, where the lessons, the mistakes, the experience all begin to work for you instead of against you? Because think about it, you're not starting from nothing, you're starting from understanding. You've already seen what doesn't work. You've already paid the cost of trial and error. And that gives you something most people don't have: clarity. And clarity, when used correctly, is powerful. It allows you to move faster, not slower. To make decisions with confidence instead of hesitation. To focus on what matters without getting distracted by things that once pulled you off course. But most people never use that advantage. They carry their past as weight instead of using it as a foundation. They look at what didn't happen and assume it can't happen, instead of seeing that they're now better equipped than ever before. There's a shift that can happen here, a shift from looking back to building forward, from measuring time as something lost to seeing it as something that can still be used intentionally. And once that shift happens, everything begins to feel different. You start to realize that you don't need as much time as you once thought, because you're no longer guessing. You're applying. You're moving with direction instead of uncertainty, and that changes how quickly things can begin to take shape. This isn't about starting over from scratch. It's about starting from experience. It's about taking everything you've learned and finally using it in a way that aligns with who you are now, not who you were before. Because the truth is, purpose doesn't disappear with time. It becomes clearer, stronger, more defined, but only if you choose to reconnect with it instead of assuming it's no longer available to you. And that choice is where everything begins. Not in a big dramatic change, but in a shift in how you see yourself. A decision that says, this is not the end of my growth. This is the point where I finally understand how to direct it. Once that decision is made, something opens. You begin to see possibilities you didn't see before. You begin to act in ways that feel more intentional, more aligned, more focused, and that creates momentum where there once was hesitation. So if you've been feeling like your best years are behind you, pause. Because that belief may not be truth, it may be a story that formed without you questioning it. And once you question it, everything begins to change. Because your future is not determined by how much time has passed, but by how you choose to use what remains. And when you begin to use it with clarity, purpose, and intention, your best years don't fade, they begin. There is a peculiar change that comes upon many men, not suddenly, but gradually, and so quietly that it is seldom recognized for what it truly is. It does not announce itself as defeat, nor does it resemble failure in any obvious form. Instead, it appears as reason, as maturity, as a form of acceptance. Yet beneath this appearance lies something far more dangerous. A man reaches a point where he no longer strives as he once did. He no longer reaches forward with the same intensity, nor does he concern himself with possibilities beyond his immediate condition. He tells himself that he has seen enough, learned enough, and experienced enough to understand how things truly work. And from this understanding, he begins to narrow his expectations. This narrowing does not feel like surrender. It feels justified. It feels as though one is simply adjusting to reality. The disappointments of the past, the efforts that did not yield the desired return, the opportunities that passed without result, all of these begin to form a quiet argument within the mind. And that argument leads to a subtle conclusion, that one should no longer expect as much as before. Yet this conclusion, though it appears reasonable, is built upon incomplete understanding. It is not that opportunity has diminished, but that belief has been altered. The man has not lost his capacity, he has merely reduced his expectation of what that capacity may produce. And once expectation is lowered, action follows accordingly. There is a difference between wisdom and withdrawal, though many confuse the two. Wisdom refines effort. It directs energy toward that which is meaningful and eliminates what is unnecessary. Withdrawal, however, reduces effort altogether. It disguises itself as prudence, yet results in stagnation. The distinction lies not in what is abandoned, but in what is pursued. The man who withdraws does not always recognize his condition. He continues to act, to fulfill responsibilities, and to maintain what he has built. From the outside, he appears stable, even successful. Yet within, there is little sense of expansion. He is no longer building, he is preserving. And though preservation has its place, it cannot replace creation. This condition is reinforced by repetition. Each time a man chooses the familiar over the possible, each time he avoids uncertainty in favor of comfort, the pattern strengthens. Over time, what began as a single adjustment becomes a way of living. The mind grows accustomed to limitation and ceases to question it. There are many who reach this stage and remain there, not because they lack ability, but because they have accepted a diminished vision of what is possible. They do not see this acceptance as defeat. They see it as realism. And therein lies the danger, for what is accepted without question becomes fixed. Consider the example of Colonel Sanders, who after many years of ordinary existence began the work for which he would later be known. He did not accept that his time had passed. He did not conclude that his efforts would no longer yield result. Instead, he acted with the understanding that his experience had prepared him, not limited him. Others, observing such individuals, often regard them as exceptions. They say that such outcomes are rare, that they cannot be expected. Yet this view overlooks the principle involved. The difference was not in circumstance, but in belief. One man accepted limitation. Another refused to do so. It must be understood that the mind, when left unchecked, will seek comfort in certainty, even if that certainty is limiting. It prefers the known over the unknown, the familiar over the uncertain. This tendency, while useful in some respects, becomes an obstacle when it prevents advancement. The individual must therefore examine his own thinking. He must ask whether what he has accepted as truth is in fact based upon reason or merely upon repetition. He must determine whether his current position is the result of deliberate choice or unexamined habit. There is an affirmation which may be applied in this examination. I do not accept quiet surrender as wisdom. I reclaim my right to create. This statement serves not as denial of reality, but as a challenge to limitation. It reminds the individual that his capacity for creation has not been removed, only unused. As this idea is considered, a shift begins to take place. The individual starts to recognize that what he has accepted as final may not be so. He begins to question the conclusions he has drawn, and in doing so, he opens the possibility of change. This questioning is the first step toward renewed action. Others may not immediately perceive this shift. It occurs within, altering thought before it alters behavior. Yet in time, its effects become visible. The individual begins to take interest in new possibilities, to consider actions he had previously dismissed, and to re-engage with the idea of building rather than merely maintaining. To those around him, this change may appear subtle at first. They may notice a renewed energy, a greater attentiveness, or a willingness to engage where previously there was indifference. These signs, though small, indicate a larger transformation taking place beneath the surface. It is important to recognize that this process requires deliberate effort. The patterns that have been formed over years do not dissolve at once. They must be replaced through repeated action and reinforced through continued thought. The individual must choose, again and again, to act in accordance with his renewed understanding. There may be moments of hesitation where the old patterns attempt to reassert themselves. The individual may feel the pull of familiarity, the suggestion that it is easier to remain as he is. In these moments, he must recall the distinction between comfort and progress and choose accordingly. As he continues, the new pattern begins to strengthen. Action becomes more natural, and the resistance that once accompanied it begins to fade. The individual finds that he is no longer compelled to remain within his previous limits. He has, through deliberate effort, begun to extend them. Others will begin to see this more clearly. They will observe not only the change in behavior, but the change in presence. The individual appears more engaged, more directed, and more alive to possibility. This perception alters the way others respond to him, creating new opportunities for interaction and advancement. Thus, what began as a quiet examination of belief becomes the foundation for renewed creation. The individual, having recognized the illusion of surrender, reclaims his capacity to act. He moves forward, not as one who is beginning anew without knowledge, but as one who is applying knowledge with greater understanding. And so it may be said that the greatest obstacle is not time nor circumstance, but the acceptance of limitation. Once that acceptance is withdrawn, the path forward becomes visible. The individual, no longer confined by his previous conclusions, begins to act with intention. In this manner, the stage which once appeared to be a conclusion reveals itself as a point of beginning. Not a beginning of uncertainty, but of clarity. Not a beginning of trial, but of application. And from this beginning, progress, once thought unlikely, becomes not only possible, but probable. There is a remarkable misunderstanding which causes many men to underestimate their greatest possession. It is not wealth, nor position, nor even opportunity. It is experience. Yet instead of recognizing it as a resource, they carry it as a burden, recalling past events not for instruction, but for regret. Experience, when viewed improperly, becomes a record of what did not occur. A man remembers the efforts that failed, the paths that did not lead where expected, and the decisions that produced less than desired. From these recollections, he forms the belief that he has already attempted what could have been done, and that little remains available. But this is not the correct interpretation. Experience is not a record of defeat. It is a collection of refined understanding. It reveals with increasing clarity what does not work, what does not endure, and what does not lead to lasting result. In this sense, it eliminates uncertainty rather than creating it. The man who understands this begins to see his past differently. He no longer asks, "Why did this not succeed?" but rather, "What has this taught me that I may now apply?" In this shift of questioning lies a transformation. What once appeared as wasted effort is revealed as preparation of the highest order. There is a distinct advantage possessed by those who have lived long enough to observe patterns. They are less easily misled by appearance. They recognize the difference between what is promised and what is delivered. They see through distractions that once consumed their attention. This clarity, though often unacknowledged, is a powerful form of direction. Consider the man who has attempted many pursuits and found them lacking. If he views these attempts as failures, he concludes that his efforts were in vain. Yet if he examines them as instruction, he realizes that he has eliminated many unproductive paths. He stands now with fewer uncertainties and a clearer sense of what is worth pursuing. There are individuals who begin with enthusiasm but without understanding. They move quickly, yet often in the wrong direction. They expend time discovering what does not work. The man who has already made these discoveries possesses an advantage, for he may now proceed with greater precision. It is for this reason that many of the most significant achievements have been produced by those who did not begin early. They began with knowledge. Their actions were not based upon assumption, but upon experience. Each step was informed, each decision considered, and each effort directed toward a clearer aim. Andrew Carnegie did not achieve his greatest influence in his earliest years. His rise was the result of accumulated understanding, applied with increasing effectiveness over time. Henry Ford did not succeed in his first attempts. It was through repeated effort, guided by experience, that he refined his method and produced lasting result. These examples are not exceptions, but illustrations of a principle. Experience, when properly used, reduces the need for repeated trial. It allows the individual to bypass errors that would otherwise consume time. It converts years of uncertainty into moments of decision. Yet many fail to use this advantage. They carry their past as weight, recalling what did not occur and allowing it to influence their present action. They hesitate, not because they lack knowledge, but because they interpret their knowledge incorrectly. They see evidence of difficulty where there is evidence of instruction. The individual must therefore reconsider the meaning of his past. He must examine it not as a measure of what he did not achieve, but as a source of what he now understands. This examination requires honesty, for it is easier to accept regret than to extract value. There is an affirmation which may be applied in this process. I transform all past experience into present power and future direction. This statement directs attention away from loss and toward use. It encourages the individual to see his past as something that may be applied rather than something that must be carried. As this perspective develops, hesitation begins to diminish. The individual no longer feels that he is beginning without knowledge. He recognizes that he possesses a form of understanding that others do not yet have. This recognition produces confidence, not based upon assumption, but upon experience. Others begin to perceive this confidence. They observe a difference in the manner of decision. The individual does not rush, yet he does not delay unnecessarily. He considers, then acts. His movements are measured, his efforts directed, and his results increasingly consistent. This perception alters the way others respond. They begin to trust his judgment, to seek his input, and to recognize his capacity. Opportunities which once seemed distant now appear more frequently. Not because they were absent before, but because the individual is now prepared to engage with them effectively. There is also a reduction in wasted effort. The individual no longer pursues every possibility. He selects those that align with his understanding and disregards the rest. This selectiveness increases efficiency, allowing him to achieve more with less expenditure of time. It must be understood that this efficiency is not the result of greater effort, but of better direction. The individual is no longer exploring without guidance. He is applying what he has learned. Each action is informed, each decision supported by prior knowledge. There is a subtle shift that occurs in this stage. The individual begins to trust his own experience. He no longer relies entirely upon external opinion, nor does he seek constant reassurance. He listens, considers, and then decides, guided by what he knows to be true through observation. This trust strengthens with use. Each successful application reinforces the belief that experience is a reliable guide. Even when results are not immediate, the individual understands that his direction is sound, for it is based upon accumulated knowledge rather than impulse. Others begin to see in him a quality of steadiness. He is not easily influenced by passing trends, nor is he distracted by temporary opportunity. He moves with purpose, guided by a clear sense of what is worthwhile. This steadiness creates respect, for it is uncommon. There is also a reduction in fear. Much of fear arises from uncertainty, from not knowing what to expect. The individual who has experienced difficulty and observed its nature is less affected by it. He recognizes challenges not as unknown threats, but as conditions that may be managed. Thus, what once appeared as disadvantage is revealed as strength. The years that were thought to be lost are seen as invested. The experiences that were once regretted are now understood. The individual stands not behind others, but in a position of unique advantage. It is at this point that progress begins to accelerate. The individual, no longer burdened by misinterpretation, applies himself with clarity. He moves forward, not as one who is attempting without knowledge, but as one who is using knowledge with intention. The path ahead, though still requiring effort, is no longer uncertain. It is defined by understanding, guided by experience, and supported by deliberate action. The individual advances, not in spite of his past, but because of it. And so, it may be said that experience, when properly understood, is not a record of limitation, but a store of power. It contains within it the lessons, the corrections, and the insights required for effective action. When used, it reduces time, sharpens effort, and increases result. The man who recognizes this ceases to look backward with regret. He looks forward with purpose, carrying with him not the weight of his past, but its value. Through this, he transforms what once seemed to hinder him into that which now propels him forward. There is a force within every man which, when active, compels him toward achievement, and when dormant, leaves him without direction. This force is desire. It is not merely a wish, nor a passing interest, but a sustained impulse toward a definite end. Without it, effort loses its energy, and action becomes uncertain. Over time, this force may diminish, not because it has been removed, but because it has been neglected. Repeated disappointment, unfulfilled plans, and prolonged uncertainty may cause a man to reduce the intensity of his desire. He does not abandon it entirely, but he lowers it to a level that no longer demands action. This reduction often occurs without awareness. A man tells himself that he is being practical, that he is adjusting his expectations to align with what he believes to be possible. Yet in doing so, he weakens the very force that would enable him to create new results. He substitutes caution for ambition and calls it wisdom. It must be understood that desire does not disappear. It remains, though it may become inactive. Beneath the surface, there is often a sense that something remains unfinished, that more could be done, that a different outcome is still possible. This feeling, though sometimes ignored, is evidence that desire still exists. The individual must bring this desire back into conscious awareness. He must examine what he truly wishes to achieve, not based upon what he has attempted before, but based upon what he now understands. This requires honesty, for it is easier to accept diminished ambition than to revive a greater one. There is a tendency to believe that one's aim must remain consistent with past identity. A man may think that because he once pursued a certain path, he must continue in that direction, yet this is not so. As understanding changes, so too must the aim. It must reflect present knowledge, not past assumption. The selection of a new aim is therefore essential. It must be definite, for without definiteness, desire lacks direction. A vague intention produces scattered effort, while a clear aim organizes